What would you do if at 9 years old, a man you trusted put a tiny brass key in your palm, looked you dead in the eye, and asked you to keep a secret for the rest of his life? What if that key opened a door to $1 million war that no one in your family saw coming? My name is Mavis. Her name is Sofia Vasquez, and this is the story of a promise made at a Brooklyn kitchen table that waited 11 years to shatter everything. Here is Sofia. I was 9 the first time I understood that an adult could be serious in a way that was not about being angry. Godfather Sal sat across from me at his kitchen table in his brownstone in Brooklyn on a Sunday after Mass. The table was the same one his own father had used in Sicily, and the wood was so old it had darkened into the color of dried blood. There were coffee rings on it and a small dish of pistachios, and his hands were folded in front of him as if he was praying. He did not look like he was praying. He looked like a man with a job to do, and the job was me. I was wearing a dress my mother had ironed that morning, white with small blue flowers. I remember the flowers because I picked at one while he was talking, and later I felt bad about it, as if the flower had been a witness to whatever was about to happen. He said, "Sofia," I said. "Yes, Godfather Sal." He reached into his shirt pocket, the one over his heart, and he took out a small cloth. He unwrapped the cloth. Inside the cloth was a key. I had seen keys before. House keys, bike keys, the key to the back door of my grandmother's apartment. This was not one of those. It was a brass key, smaller than my thumb, and it was old. Old like the table. Old like the wood of the front door his father had carried across an ocean in 1908. He put it on the table between the pistachio dish and the coffee cup, and he slid it toward me with one finger. He said, "This key opens something that belongs to you, not to your mother, not to your brother, not to my son, Luca, to you." I was 9. I did not know what to do with that sentence. I looked at the key. I looked at him. I waited for him to smile, because grown-ups said things like this, and then smiled, and then it turned out to be a joke about ice cream. He did not smile. He said, "You sit tight. You don't tell anyone. You don't go looking until you're ready. Promise me." I promised. I did not understand the promise. I was 9, and the day was warm, and my mother was in the next room laughing at something my brother had done, and the brownstone smelled like coffee and old wood and a sauce Sal had put on the stove in the morning. The key was small enough to forget. He wrapped it back into the cloth and gave it to me, and I put it in a small jewelry box my mother had given me for my confirmation. The jewelry box was white, with a ballerina on the lid. I put the cloth under the ballerina's feet. That night, when my mother asked what Sal and I had talked about, I said, "He told me a story about his father." She smiled and said, "That's Sal." She believed me. I forgot the key. I forgot the promise. I went to school. I went to the brownstone on Sundays. I grew up a little. I turned 10. I turned 11. I turned 12. Sal was there for all of it, in the kitchen in the same chair with a fresh cup of coffee and the same expression of a man who had done his part and was now waiting for time to do its. I would sit next to him and he would let me dip the corner of my bread into his espresso, which my mother would have killed me for. And he would tell me about his father, who had landed at Ellis Island with one suitcase and a recipe for Sunday sauce written on a slip of paper pinned to the inside of his coat. He told me the same stories over and over, the way old men do, and I listened the way children do, which is to say I did not really listen at all. I just liked the sound of his voice and the way his hands moved when he talked, like he was still carrying the suitcase. I did not know then that time was the one thing he did not have. I did not know he was already sick. I did not know that the man at the table, pouring me a thimble of espresso, had just handed me a war that would not start for 11 years. I was 9. I was dipping bread. The key was under the ballerina in a white jewelry box, and the world was exactly as small and as safe as it looked. I know what you're thinking. You are thinking, get to the part where the key matters. Stay with me, because the next 11 years are the part of the story where nothing happens, and the nothing is the point. I was 13 when Godfather Sal died. It was a Tuesday. I remember that because Tuesdays were the days my mother did laundry, and she had a basket of towels in her arms when my uncle called. She put the basket down on the kitchen floor and sat next to it. She did not cry. She went very still, the way a person goes still when their body has heard something the mind has not caught up to yet. I stood in the doorway holding a glass of water I had poured for myself, and I watched her, and I knew before she told me that something important had left the world. Sal had been sick for a while. He had not told us. He had told no one. My mother found out only when the hospital called her, and by then he had been there for 3 days. He had walked in on his own. He had filled out his own paperwork. The nurse said he had been reading a newspaper when his heart stopped. She said he had not looked afraid. She said he had looked like a man who had finished the job he had come to do. I went to the funeral. I did not cry at the funeral. I cried 2 weeks later in the school bathroom in a stall with my forehead against the metal divider, and I did not know why I was crying that day instead of the day of the funeral. I think it was because 2 weeks later, I realized I was not going to dip bread into his espresso ever again. The finality of that was the thing I could not carry. The next year, my mother showed me a newspaper clipping. A developer had bought a brownstone on our old block in Brooklyn. The headline read, "Vasquez Brownstone sold for $2.1 million to local developer." I was 14. I read the article at the kitchen counter with the heel of a bread roll in one hand and a glass of milk in the other, the way a 14-year-old reads anything. I remember the photo showed a row of brownstones, all of them with the same wrought iron railings, all of them built in the same year, and one of them had a sold sign staked in the small front garden like a headstone. I remember thinking that the name Vasquez felt like a strange coincidence. I did not connect it to anything. I did not connect it to Sal. I did not connect it to the key. Because I had forgotten the key. Because the key was in a jewelry box that was by then at the back of a closet in my mother's bedroom, under a stack of school papers and a plastic bag of old Halloween costumes. I went to high school. I went to college. I studied something practical because my mother had raised us alone after my father left, and I did not have the luxury of studying something impractical. I made friends. I lost friends. I had a serious boyfriend for 2 years and a casual one for 3 months and a long winter where I did not get out of bed much and a long summer where I did not come home until sunrise. I was 20. I was the kind of 20 that looks, from the outside, like a normal 20. Inside, I was a girl who had buried a godfather at 13 and never finished the sentence about him. The jewelry box moved with me, then out of me, then back to my mother. I had loaned it to her when she was helping me move out of my dorm, and she had put it on her dresser, and then she had moved it to her closet when my brother came home from his first deployment and needed the dresser for his medals. The jewelry box ended up at my grandmother's house, in a guest bedroom, on a shelf, next to a rosary and a small ceramic Virgin Mary that had lost its paint. I forgot the box. I forgot the cloth. I forgot the key. I was 20, working a job I did not love, dating a man I did not love, paying rent I could barely afford. And the key was sitting in a guest bedroom in my grandmother's house, on a wooden shelf next to a rosary whose beads had gone yellow, waiting the way Sal had told it to wait. The war had not started. The war was still 11 years away from the day he had pressed it into my palm. I was not ready. He had known I was not ready. He had known it would take the rest of my childhood and a piece of my 20s before I would be. He had known, I think, that I would have to become a different person first, and that the becoming was the part I had to do alone. Now we are moving. I am not going to tell you what the lawyer said in this chapter, because Sophia is about to tell you herself. On a Tuesday afternoon, in a parking lot, with her hands on the steering wheel and the seat heater burning a square into the back of her leg. The lawyer's name is the one piece I am going to keep from you until she gives it to you. Go ahead, Sophia. I was 20 and my grandmother had just died. Not Sal's wife, my mother's mother, a different grandmother. A woman named Rosa who had outlived 2 husbands and 3 brothers and a house fire, and had finally, at 86, decided she was done with the whole project of being alive. My mother was the one who had to clean out the house, and she did not want to do it alone. And I had driven up on a Saturday with 2 coffees and a box of donuts and a half-finished attitude about helping. We did not get to the guest bedroom until Sunday afternoon. We did not talk much, because that is how my family handles death. We get practical. We do not dwell. We pack. The house smelled like my grandmother's perfume, the same perfume she had worn for 40 years, and under it the smell of dust and old wool. I had slept in that guest bedroom 100 times, on a mattress that sagged in the middle, under a quilt my grandmother had sewn by hand, and I had not known, in any of those nights, that the key was sitting on the shelf above my head. I was holding a stack of old photo albums when my mother said, from across the room, "Sophia, look at this!" She was laughing. I remember that specifically because my mother had not laughed in 2 days, and the laugh sounded like someone had turned the radio back on in a house that had been silent for a week. She was holding the white jewelry box, the one with the ballerina on the lid. She had pulled it off the shelf and the lid was open, and she was peering into it like it was a small treasure chest. "Sophia," she said, "you have a key in here from when you were little. It is so cute. Where is it from? I set the photo albums down on the bed. I walked over. I looked into the box. Under the ballerina, inside a small cloth that had gone yellow with age, was the key. I did not pick it up. Not at first. I stood over my mother's shoulder and I looked at it, and the kitchen table came back, and Sal's hands came back, and his voice came back, low and careful, the way he used to talk when he was about to say something he needed me to remember. The key opens something that belongs to you. Sit tight. I picked it up. It was smaller than I had remembered and heavier. Heavier than a key that small had any right to be. I turned it over in my hand. There were scratches on the brass, the kind that come from years of being carried in a man's shirt pocket against his chest for 40 years. And I understood, standing in my dead grandmother's guest bedroom, that the man had not been sentimental. He had been patient. He had been planning. I called the lawyer who had handled Sal's estate. His name was Robert, and he had been Sal's lawyer for 30 years, and he had retired the year I turned 16. The office number still went to a real person who, after I explained who I was, said, "Hold on, sweetheart. I am going to forward you to my partner. He has the Vasquez file. He has had it on his desk for a reason." The way she said "for a reason" made me sit down on the edge of my grandmother's bed. There's a particular tone that older women use when they have been waiting to see how a story ends, and that was the tone. I just did not yet know whose. The partner's name was David. He was younger than I had expected and slower in the way careful lawyers are slow. He asked me to describe the key. I described the key. He asked me to read him any marks on the brass. I read him the marks. He went quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Miss Vasquez, I need 48 hours. Do not lose that key. Do not let anyone know you have it. Do not go to the brownstone 48 hours. I said, "What is in the brownstone?" He said, 48 hours, Miss Vasquez. Sit tight." Nobody had said that to me in 11 years. Nobody had said it the way Sal had said it, like a man tightening a knot. The lawyer was using his voice, but the words were not his. They were a dead man's waiting for the right 20-year-old to hear them again. I hung up the phone. I sat on the edge of my grandmother's bed for a long time. My mother came in once to ask if I wanted more coffee, and I said yes, and I lied. I did not know yet what Sal had done. I only knew that the key, which I had been carrying in my coat pocket for 2 days like a small, strange coin, was heavier than it had been when I was 9. I waited the way a woman waits when she has just been told that something she has been ignoring for 11 years has not been ignoring her back. I want to be careful here, because this is the chapter where the story changes. Up to now, you have been listening to a memoir. From this chapter on, you are listening to a legal thriller. The narrator is still Sophia, but the voice you're going to hear is the voice of a woman who has just learned that the man she buried at 13 left her a war. And the war has already been going on for years, and her godfather's son is winning it. Sit tight. She is about to tell you what the lawyer said. I waited the 48 hours. I did not wait them well. I drove home from my grandmother's house with the key in my coat pocket. I did not unpack my bag. I did not go to work. I told my job I had a family thing, which was true in a way I had not been ready to explain. I sat on my couch. I watched the cable news. I turned it off. I watched a cooking show. I turned it off. I put the key on my coffee table and I stared at it, the way you stare at a phone that has not rung yet, willing it to ring, terrified that it would. At hour 43, I called my mother and asked her if she remembered what Sal had said to me at the kitchen table. She said, "Sophia, that was 20 years ago. Of course I do not remember. What is going on?" I said, "Nothing. Just thinking about him." She said, "That is nice, honey. He would have liked that." At hour 47, my phone rang. The number was the lawyer's. I let it ring 3 times because I did not want to seem too eager. I let it ring 3 times because I was afraid. I picked up. I said, "This is Sophia." He said, "Miss Vasquez, I have the file. I have had it for 6 years, and I have been waiting for this phone call since the day Robert forwarded it to me, and I need you to sit down." I was already sitting down. I said, "I am sitting down." He said, "I need you to really sit down. Somewhere you can take notes. This is going to be a long call." I moved to the kitchen table. I got a pen. I got a legal pad from a drawer, the kind I had bought for a college class I had not finished. I said, "Go ahead." He went quiet for a long moment. I could hear him turning pages. I could hear him breathing. I could hear, faintly, a clock ticking on his wall. Then he said, "Sophia, your godfather left you a deed." I wrote the word, deed. I underlined it. I said, "A deed to what?" He said, "The brownstone." I said, The brownstone was sold. It was in the paper. I read the paper. He said, the brownstone was never sold. Luca forged the sale. The buyer's identity on the public record is a shell company Luca created in 2018, 2 years after Sal died. The $2.1 million never went to a developer. The $2.1 million went into a trust account that Luca controls, that Luca has been drawing from, that Luca has been living off for the last 11 years. The tenant in the brownstone right now, this month, today, is a cleaning company that Luca owns. The company is called Vasquez Building Services. It does not clean anything. It sends Luca a check every month and it calls itself a tenant so that the brownstone looks occupied on paper. I stopped writing. I said, "What deed?" He said, "The original deed, the one your godfather filed with Kings County in 2010, 2 years before he died, naming you as the sole beneficiary of the property. The filing required 2 possession proofs. One of them is a notarized letter from a witness who saw Sal hand the deed to you. The other is this." He paused. "The other is the key. The same key you are holding right now, Miss Vasquez. The deed names you as 100% beneficiary, contingent on your possession of the key, and your godfather did not leave you a key to a memory. He left you a key to a building." I did not speak. I did not write. The pen was in my hand and I was looking at it, and the pen was shaking, and I had not known pens could shake in a hand that still. I sat at the kitchen table of my apartment in a city I had moved to for a job I did not love, and I understood, for the first time in my life, that a man who had fed me Sunday sauce and let me dip bread into his espresso had, in the same kitchen, in the same chair, in the same voice, trusted me with something he had trusted no one else with. Not his wife, not his priest, not the son he had raised. I said very quietly into the phone, "Is Luca in trouble?" The lawyer said, "Luca is in a great deal of trouble. The question is what you want to do about it. If you have stayed with me this far, you are the reason I do this. Now we are going inside. If you were Sophia and you were standing on the sidewalk in Brooklyn and you were 20 years old and you had a key to a building that your godfather had secretly willed to you, and a man you had called Uncle Luca for your entire life was, at that very moment, walking toward you, what would you do?" I will tell you what she did. She went in. I went back to Brooklyn on a Wednesday. I told my job I was sick. I was not sick. I took the train. I sat by the window, and the city passed in the way it does when you are not looking at it, which is to say it passed like a movie you have seen before, and I did not see any of it. I was holding the key in my pocket, and I was thinking about a man who had been dead for 7 years, and I was trying to figure out how a man who had loved his son as much as Sal had loved Luca could spend the last years of his life quietly building a wall between that son and the only thing the son wanted. The brownstone was on a block I had not been to in years. It was a tree-lined block with brownstones on both sides, and stoops and fire escapes, and a small grocery on the corner with a green awning that had been there since before I was born. The brownstone was the 3rd house in from the corner. It was a 4-story building with a black door and a brass knocker shaped like a lion's head, and a small front garden that had, in Sal's time, held tomatoes in the summer and a single rose bush that Sal had brought up from Sicily in a coffee can. The garden was overgrown now. The tomato stakes were gone. The rose bush had become a thicket. I stood on the sidewalk for a long time. I took the key out of my pocket. I looked at it. The brass had warmed in my hand. I looked at the door. The door was painted black, and the paint was the same black Sal had used, and there was a small brass number, 347, screwed into the wood above the knocker, and the number was a little crooked. The way Sal had always left it, because he said a crooked number meant someone still lived in the house. I put the key in the lock. The key turned and the door opened, and the smell of the house came out at me. Old wood, lemon oil, dust, and underneath it, faintly, the smell of coffee, as if the percolator had been left on a counter somewhere inside. The house was empty of people. The cleaning company, whatever it was, did not clean on Wednesdays. I walked in. I closed the door behind me. I stood in the hallway and I breathed, and the breathing was the loudest sound in the house. I went to the basement. The stairs were narrow and the wood of the banister was smooth, and I put my hand on it as I went down, and the wood was the temperature of a person who has just left a room. The basement was one long room, painted white, with a workbench at one end and a furnace at the other, and in the middle, against the far wall, a strongbox. The strongbox was iron, painted black, with a brass plate around the keyhole that had gone green with age. There was a number stamped into the plate, 1908, the year Sal's father had landed. I knelt in front of the strongbox. I took the key out of my pocket. I put it in the keyhole. The key fit the way a key fits when it has been waiting for it, without any wiggle, without any force, the way a hand fits into a hand that has been open. I turned the key. The lock clicked. The door of the strongbox opened. Inside the strongbox there were 3 things. The first was a folder, manila, with my name on the tab, written in Sal's hand. Inside the folder was the original deed to the brownstone, filed with Kings County in 2010, 2 years before Sal died, naming me, Sofia Vasquez, as the sole beneficiary of the property, with a notation in the margin in Sal's hand that read, "Contingent on possession of the key by Sofia Vasquez, witnessed and notarized." The second was a notarized letter, 1 page, written in Sal's careful hand, dated the same day he had given me the key. It said, "Luca is greedy. Your family will forgive him. You will need this when you are a woman. Sit tight." The third was a second key, heavier, newer, with a small paper tag tied to it, and on the tag, in the same hand, the words, "Front door." I sat on the basement floor with the folder and the letter and the key in my lap, and I did not move for a long time. The strongbox was open. The deed was in my hands. The letter was in my hands. The second key was in my hands. The brownstone was above me, and the sidewalk was outside, and somewhere in the city, my godfather's son was about to have a very bad afternoon. I said out loud, to no one, "I am ready, Godfather." I did not know yet what ready meant. I was about to find out. "I am going to ask you one question, and I want you to sit with it for a second. If a man raised you, fed you, called you his niece, and you found out, in the same week, that he had also quietly given away the thing you were counting on inheriting, the thing you had been living off of for a decade, the thing you had been telling yourself was yours, what would you do?" You do not have to answer. Sofia is about to show you. I heard the front door before I saw him. I was still on the basement floor with the folder open in my lap, and I heard the front door of the brownstone open, and I heard a voice I had not heard in years, and the voice was saying, "Who is in here? Who is in my house?" Luca. Uncle Luca, Sal's only son, 51 years old, wearing a suit that did not quite fit him, his hair too long for his face red, his eyes wet, his hands shaking. And the moment he saw me, he stopped. And the moment he stopped was the moment I knew he had not expected me. He had expected a burglar, he had expected a tenant. He had not expected me. He said, "Sofia?" I said, "Hello, Uncle Luca." He said, "What are you doing in my father's house?" I said, "I am looking for something that belongs to me." He came down the stairs. I could hear every step. He came into the basement, and he saw the strongbox, and he saw the strongbox open, and I saw his face change in a way I will not forget. The color went out of his face. He looked at the strongbox, and he looked at me, and he looked at the folder in my lap, and he said very quietly, "Where did you get that key?" I said, "Godfather Sal gave it to me. I was 9 years old. He told me to sit tight." I sat tight. Luca did not sit down. He stood in the middle of the basement, and he began to pace, the way a man paces when he is trying to outrun something that is already in the room. He said, "You do not understand, Sofia. You do not understand what my father was like at the end. He was confused. He was sick. He did not know what he was doing. That deed is not real. The lawyer is not real. None of this is real." I said, "I have the deed. I have the letter. I have the key. The key opened the strongbox. The strongbox had your father's handwriting on it. I am sorry, Uncle Luca. It is real." He stopped pacing. He looked at me, and his eyes were the eyes of a man who had, for 11 years, been telling himself a story about a confused old man, and the story was no longer holding up. He said, "He would not have done this to me. He would not have done this to his own son. I am his son. I am his only son. I took care of him. I was there every day." "Where were you?" I held the letter out to him. I did not say anything. I just held it out. He took it. He read it. The letter was 1 paragraph. He read it once, and he read it again. And I watched his face as he read it the second time. And the second time his chin began to shake. And the second time his eyes filled. And the second time he said, out loud, to no one, to the basement, to the strongbox, to the memory of a man who had been dead for 7 years, "Luca will hate you for this. That is the proof he was never the man I wanted him to be." He read the line a 3rd time. He said, "That is not what he said. That is not what he meant." I said, "It is his handwriting. The lawyer has 3 witnesses. There is a notarized signature. He meant it, Uncle Luca. He meant it, and you know he meant it, and that is why you are crying." He cried. I did not comfort him. I did not move toward him. I sat on the basement floor with the deed in my lap, and I watched my godfather's son cry on the floor of his father's house. And the brownstone was quiet except for the sound of his breathing and the sound of a clock that had been ticking in the kitchen for 40 years and was still ticking now. After a long time, he said, "What do you want?" I said, "I want what he left me." He said, "And me?" I said, "What did he leave you, Uncle Luca?" He did not answer. He sat down on the basement floor across from me, and he put his head in his hands, and he stayed there for a long time, and I stayed across from him, and the strong box stayed open between us, and the deed stayed in my lap, and the key stayed in my pocket, and the clock kept ticking, and the brownstone did what brownstones do. It held what had been put inside it. Including, it turned out, me. Now we are inside the courtroom. I want to warn you about something, because I have read a lot of these stories and watched a lot of these videos. And the mistake most people make is they think the courtroom is where the truth gets found. It is not. The courtroom is where the truth gets tested, and the testing is the part that takes a year out of your life and a few years off your face. Sophia did the testing. Here's how it went. Lucas sued me. He sued to invalidate the deed on 3 grounds, and he picked the 3 grounds a smart lawyer picks when the client is rich and the son is a son. He said fraud. He said undue influence. He said his father had been senile in 2010. He said in the public filings that his father had loved him too much and that I, a 9-year-old girl, had somehow talked an old man out of the brownstone over Sunday sauce. He said the key was a prop. He said the letter was a forgery. He said the witness signatures had been coached. My lawyer, David, told me to expect this. He told me that Luca would go for the obvious attack first because it was the cheapest, and that when it failed, he would go for the next one, and that the next one would be uglier. He said, "Sophia, I need you to understand that this is not a fight. This is a process. The process is the part where Luca tries to bankrupt you, and the part where the court tries the case, and the part where, if we are lucky, we end up with a settlement. If we are unlucky, we go to trial. We do not have 2 years of money. We have the deed, the letter, the key, and 3 witnesses. That is our case. That is enough." We started building the case. The first witness was a man named Tony, Sal's barber for 30 years. Tony said Sal had come into the shop in 2010 and told him, while Tony was cutting his hair, that he was leaving the brownstone to a girl. Tony said he had asked Sal which girl. Tony said Sal had said, "The one with the quiet eyes." Tony had not known my name. He had known my eyes. He was willing to swear to it because Sal had tipped him $20 that day, which Sal never did, and because Tony had been in the chair when Sal had said it, and the chair, Tony said, did not lie. The second witness was a woman named Anna, Sal's neighbor for 40 years. Anna said Sal had knocked on her door one afternoon and asked her to look at a piece of paper. Anna said she had looked. Anna said Sal had said, "It is the deed. I am leaving the house to a girl I baptized. People will say I lost my mind. I did not. I want you to remember that, Anna, on the day I die and the day after, when my son starts asking questions." The third witness was Sal's priest, Father Marco, 82, in a wheelchair, who had driven to the courthouse in a van with his nephew, and who sat in the witness box for 15 minutes and said, in a voice that filled the room the way church candles fill a room, that Sal had come to him in confession in 2010 and asked whether it was a sin to leave an inheritance to a girl instead of a son. Father Marco said he had told Sal it was not a sin. Father Marco said Sal had told him it was the only thing he had done right. Father Marco did not cry. Father Marco said, "He was the most clear-headed man I have ever met, and I have been a priest for 58 years, and I have known a great many clear-headed men, and your godfather was clearer than most of them, including me." The forensic document examiner was a man named Dr. Levin, who had spent 3 months going over the deed and the letter with a magnifying glass and a small instrument that measured the age of ink. Dr. Levin dated the deed and the signature to a period when Sal had been, in his professional opinion, of clearly sound mind. Dr. Levin said on the stand, in language so dry it could have started a fire, "There is no evidence of duress. There is no evidence of cognitive impairment. There is no evidence that this document was written by anyone other than the man whose signature is on it. The signature is consistent. The ink is consistent. The pen, pressure, is consistent. The man who wrote this knew what he was writing." We sat in the courtroom and we waited. Luca sat across the aisle from us with his lawyers. 3 of them in suits that cost more than my rent. And he did not look at me once. He did not look at the key. He did not look at the letter. He did not look at the witnesses. He looked at his hands, the way a man looks at his hands when his hands are the only part of himself he still trusts. And then, on a Wednesday, 3 weeks before the trial was supposed to start, Luca's lawyers called my lawyer and said the magic word. The magic word was not, "we lose." The magic word was, "we settle." And the settlement, when it came, was the kind of settlement that ends a war without either side having to say it out loud. I want to pause here because the settlement is the part of the story most people get wrong in their heads. They think the settlement is the part where Sophia wins. It is not. The settlement is the part where the war ends. Wars that end well do not end with one side cheering. They end with both sides quiet. Here's how this one ended. The settlement took 8 weeks to negotiate. The lawyers went back and forth. The terms were written in language so dense you would have needed a small lamp and a strong coffee to read them, and I did, in fact, sit at the kitchen table of my apartment with a small lamp and a strong coffee, reading the terms, paragraph by paragraph, while my mother slept in the next room because I had asked her to come and stay with me. And she had come, and we had not talked about why. The terms were these. The shell company Luca had created was unwound. The $2.1 million, minus legal fees, was clawed back. The brownstone was restored to me as sole owner, with no lien, no encumbrance, no co-ownership, no Luca. Luca was required in addition to pay a portion of my legal fees, which was the part of the settlement that made Luca's lawyers physically flinch, and which was the part I had asked David to fight for, because I had wanted Luca to understand, in money, what he had done. I did not want revenge, I wanted restitution. The difference, David had told me, was the difference between a civil case and a criminal one, and the difference in dollars was about $400,000. Luca signed the papers on a Friday. I signed them on the same Friday. We did not see each other. We did not speak. The lawyers shook hands, which I thought was a strange custom, and then they went back to their offices, and I went back to my apartment, and I sat on the couch, and I did not feel what I had expected to feel. I didn't feel triumphant. I did not feel relieved. I felt, in a way, I did not yet have the vocabulary for. Like a person who has carried a heavy bag up a long flight of stairs and has just set the bag down and is now standing on the landing, and the bag is down and the stairs are behind her, and she does not know yet what to do with her hands. My mother came into the living room. She said, "Is it over?" I said, "It is over." She said, "Are you okay?" I said, "I don't know yet." She sat next to me. She did not say anything else. We sat on the couch and the key was on the coffee table and the afternoon light was coming in through the window in that slow way Brooklyn light comes in, and the key did not look like a key anymore. It looked like a small brass thing that had done its job, and that was, I thought, the saddest thing a tool could ever look like. A month later, I sold the brownstone. I did not move in. The brownstone was Sal's and Luca's and mine and none of ours, and to live in it would have been to live inside a museum of a man who had loved us in different ways. I sold it to a family with 2 small children, and the family paid fair, and the family did not know the history, and the family did not need to. The brownstone would hold new people. That was the brownstone's job, and it had been the brownstone's job since 1908. I kept the key. I kept the letter. I kept the deed in a fireproof box in the closet of my apartment, in a place where I do not have to look at it every day. I called David, my lawyer, one last time, 3 weeks after the settlement. I said, "David, I need a favor. Can you read me the letter again? The line about Luca?" He said, "Are you sure?" I said, "Yes." He read it. "Luca will hate you for this. That is the proof he was never the man I wanted him to be." I hung up the phone. I put the key in a new jewelry box. The new jewelry box is dark wood with no ballerina, and the velvet inside is the color of dried blood, the same color as Sal's kitchen table. I put the key in it and closed the lid. The apartment was quiet. My mother was in the kitchen making coffee. Outside the window, Brooklyn was doing what Brooklyn does on a Tuesday afternoon in November, which is to say nothing in particular. I was 20, and the war was over, and I had won. And winning had not felt the way I had thought it would feel. It had felt like a key, a small brass thing on a velvet surface in a dark wooden box that had done its job. I want to leave you alone with Sophia for a minute. Just her and the key and the box and the room. Then I will come back, and we will close this thing out together. The jewelry box is on the shelf above my desk, in the apartment I live in now, in a different city, in a different life. I am not 20 anymore. I have not been 20 for a while. The shelf is wood, and the box sits on it, and the box is closed, and the key is inside. And most days I do not open it. Most days I do not need to. Most days the box is just a box, and the key is just a key, and the story is just a story. I tell myself when the apartment is too quiet. The key is small. The brass has gone darker over the years, the way brass does, the way a man goes darker when he has carried something in his chest pocket for 40 years. There's a scratch on the bow, where Sal's thumb used to rub. There's a nick on the bit, where Sal dropped it once, the only time I ever saw him drop anything while he was telling me a story about his father. He picked it up, he said, "Even the keys know how to fall, Sophia. Even the keys know how to get back up." I did not understand that day. I understand it now, the way I understand most things Sal said, which is years after he said them, and at the cost of a war I would not have chosen. I do not know what to do with the brownstone story. I think the right version is the one Sal left me, which is the version where a man loves the people in his life in different ways, and the love is not the problem, and the silence between the loves is the problem, and the silence is what a girl with a key in her pocket is supposed to outlast. The brownstone is no longer mine. The key is still mine. The jewelry box is closed. I am not sitting on the couch anymore. I am sitting at a desk in a room with a window, and the window looks out on a city I chose. And the choosing was the part Sal could not have predicted, and the choosing was the part he would have been proud of. And the choosing was the part I did for him, in the small ways that nobody sees. If you have stayed with me this long, you have done the thing Sal told me to do, which is to sit tight. You have been quiet while a story was being told. You have trusted the narrator. You have waited for the line that lives in a notarized letter in a fireproof box, which is, "Luca will hate you for this." That is the proof he was never the man I wanted him to be. I am going to put the key back in the box now. I am going to close the lid. I am going to set the box back on the shelf. I am going to sit back down at the desk. I am going to look out the window. I am going to let the afternoon do what afternoon does, and to wait, the way a key waits in a lock, the way a man waits at a kitchen table, the way a girl waits in a guest bedroom for the day she is going to be ready. Hey, it is Mavis again. Thank you for staying until the end. You stayed. That means something to me, and I think it would have meant something to Sophia, and I think, in some way I do not fully understand, it would have meant something to Godfather Sal, who did not plan for his story to be told to strangers on the internet, but who, I am willing to bet, would not have minded. Because Sal was a man who believed in waiting, and you, by being here, were the waiting. I want to ask you one thing before you go. If you had been Sophia, would you have gone into the brownstone alone? Tell me in the comments. I read them. I am curious whether the brownstone would have felt like a building to you, or whether, by the time you got to the strongbox, it would have felt like a person. If you want more stories like this, stories that are slow and that take their time, hit like and subscribe. The button is right under the video, and it is free. I will see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves, and take care of the people you promise things to. Because the promises are the part that outlives all of us. Sophia, before I let you go, the key, is it still on the shelf? It is still on the shelf. Good, leave it there. Good night, good night.